Thank you for joining us for our final webinar of the 2022 series. I am Louise and I'm the Alumni Partnership Manager here at York St John University. And this webinar is part of the York St John Alumni Series, Alumni Journeys, Creativity, Careers and Community. And you can watch all of the events that we have recorded over the last few months at the York St John University Events YouTube channel. So before I start the introduction today, I have a few housekeeping matters just to cover. So if you have any questions you wish to follow up with Simon, please just email alumni@yorksj.ac.uk and I'll happily pass them over to him and get a response. And there's also an auto script appearing during the talk and for increased accessibility. However, please be aware that sometimes this just does not translate perfectly. So thank you, and swiftly moving along to the main reason why we are here today, I would like to introduce Simon Clark. Simon graduated from York St John University in 2004 with a BA in Theology with QTS. He taught in and around York for many years before moving to North Carolina, USA, and to work in a public school. Simon continued to teach internationally, working in Switzerland and Mexico. And in 2013, he moved to California to take on a leadership role in an international baccalaureate primary years program school. During this time, Simon became an IB school evaluator and workshop leader. He is currently living in Ohio and is an assistant head of a school and PYP coordinator at the Discovery School in Mansfield. It would be fantastic to hear Simon's journey from York St John to Ohio and hopefully gain some insightful tips and advice along the way. So without further delay, I would like to pass you over to Simon and I look forward to chatting with you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here and to be part of the Alumni Journeys. I've had the opportunity to watch some of the great alumni that have graduated from York St John, from community leaders to comedians and consultants and the whole range. And so I'm honored to be part of this talk to share my journey with you. So thank you to Louise for organizing it. And so to start off with, I'd like to go back to my beginnings. I'm originally from the northeast of England, so Newton Aycliffe. And the first reason why I selected York St John to attend was because it was close enough to my parents where I could take laundry home at the weekend or washing, and I could have the freedom of being somewhere new and finding myself when I first moved to university in 2000. So really, it wasn't without my parents, I couldn't have done that, and a very generous student loan, which I'm still paying off to this day. So I'm grateful for all of those opportunities that I had when I was there. And much like all students in York, it was a very nomadic lifestyle. I lived in the Grange, Holgate Road, Hull Road, the Groves, and the whole place in between. So I got to think of York as my home for the 6 years that I was there. And whenever I'm fortunate enough to go back to the UK, I always try to spend some quality time there, seeing how the city has changed, walking around the campus. Yeah, and just catching up with old friends who I'd like to give a shout out to. Katie McGilchrist, Lindsay Hargraves, Hugh Mason, and Alison Bootland. Thank you. Some of my best friends there that I made during my time at York St John. So, as Louise mentioned, I graduated in 2004. It was difficult to find a teaching job around York. I knew that I wanted to say that I didn't want to go back to the Northeast. And so what happened for 2 years before I left the UK was a very piecemeal type position. So I did supply work, which was great professional development for me, working in different schools in and around York. I was fortunate enough to take on the role of a PPA cover at Fishergate Primary School in York. And that came through from the head teacher that I worked with was taking on a role at Fishergate, a temporary position. And so I had worked with her as my final teaching practice. So it was quite an honor to be offered that 2-day PPA job, but it was still just 2 days at the end of it. So I did supply work. I worked at Fishergate for a couple of days and anything else they'd needed. And then also to make ends meet, I worked at the PDSA, the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals at Goodrumgate. So there was lots of jobs going on there, lots of toing and froing, but it meant that I was able to stay in York, a place that I called home, considering that I lived there for 6 years. So in December, I began looking for other jobs, and a position came up in North Yorkshire in Ampleforth. It was a Key Stage 2 teacher, which was obviously quite a broad range of age groups. But I decided I wanted to move into a full-time position. So I interviewed for it and I was successful. And so I started work at Ampleforth in January 2006. And it was a great opportunity to kind of dip my feet into the water of a classroom teacher, to take on that role, and then also to work with a wide variety of age ranges from year 3 up to year 6. There was no year 5s in the school from what I remember. It was a small village school. So I learned a lot. And I also was able to round off my QTS year during that time, as well as the supply work and the substitute work, the supply work that I'd done previously. So after I completed my QTS in that July, I had made a decision that I wanted to pursue opportunities elsewhere. So a quick Google search at the time led me to an agency called the Visiting International Faculty, or VIF. They've now changed their name and they are now Participate Learning. And they specialized in offering teaching jobs to teachers from overseas into the US, predominantly in North Carolina and Virginia. And they were responsible for overseeing visas, and they would help coordinate housing and bank accounts and car rental, the whole thing. And so the uncertainty that I had of moving to a different place was lessened by the opportunity to have somebody help guide me through these things. And so I applied. I went down to London and interviewed, and was offered a position in Guilford County Schools, which is in North Carolina. It is in Greensboro and High Point. It's kind of in the center of the state. So I finished teaching in the UK around about the 20th of July, I believe. Finished off for the summer. I packed everything up in my house that I'd known in York and left my friends down there. Came home for probably just a couple of days before it was time to head to the US. So I flew from Newcastle. I said goodbye to my parents and my best friend that was there, very emotional goodbye, armed with 2 suitcases from having a whole house of belongings. Thankfully, my parents allowed me to leave some of the stuff with them. Flew down to London Heathrow. So I had a bit of a time in London Heathrow, and we boarded the plane to Newark, New Jersey, which is an interesting place. Was my first experience of my immigration to the US. So I boarded the British Airways flight, and I still remember it to this day. I got on, I had a window seat, and I was sat at the back of the plane, and I was looking out the window, and thoughts just kept coming. Was I doing the right thing? Where was I going to live? What if something happened? Did I have a contingency plan? What if, I didn't mesh over there? And what if I missed everybody too much? And I remember distinctly to my left, in the middle of the plane, there was a rather loud church youth group that was American church group. And in all fairness, they fitted the stereotype of young American people, very loud, very brash. And I was just thinking, do I really want to be part of this? And so I had a lot of time to think about this because the plane was delayed by 3 hours. We were sat on the runway for that time, and I lost count of the amount of times I just wanted to get up and open the emergency exit and just walk away. So thankfully I didn't. I stuck with it through stress and worry. I made it into the US, and I spent my first night there in a rather dingy motel outside of Newark Airport, um, and still questioning myself, but further from home. Lots of panic calls to my parents and then the agency in North Carolina as well, to kind of coordinate my next flights. And thankfully, I made it just a day later than I was supposed to, and slightly more worse for wear, I will say that. And then by this point, it was probably around the 25th of July by the time I made it down to North Carolina. We had an orientation and I met people from all over the world. There was people from Mexico, people from Spain, from Brazil, all these people that had come to the US to teach. And so it was exciting to get to know them and interact with them. We learned kind of the basics of the American education system, and it was a great opportunity to kind of network and to get to know people and to realize that you weren't alone in this situation. For a lot of people, it was the first time out of their home country, so it was good to know that there was other people going through what you were going through. So around about the 26th of July, we went from Raleigh, North Carolina to Greensboro, where I would call home for a couple of years. I went into my school and it was very utilitarian. Painted concrete blocks was kind of the facade across the whole building. So it was very under-resourced, unfortunately. 95% of the students were on free or reduced school meals, so it was a very high poverty area, and lots of issues there. It was a learning curve for me, simply because it wasn't like any school I'd worked in before. No school in York, no school I had any teaching practice with at York St. John. It was completely different. Thankfully, the students that I worked with were very forgiving of my English accent, particularly as related to the word bin, rubber and footpath, lots of faux pas and talking about things there. I also learned to speak slower when my principal took me to one side and said that I was in the South now, and so I needed to talk slower. But being from the Northeast, this was not something that came easy to me. So the students were incredibly sweet and eager to learn, and they were just such a sweet class. I taught second grade, which is the equivalent of year 3, and they were just awesome. They were just wonderful. I enjoyed spending my time with them. It also meant it gave me the opportunity to go out and explore parts of the US, places that I didn't think that I would ever get to. So I took a trip up to New York City. When my friend that I went to York St. John with, Katie, came over to visit me, we went to Washington, D.C. I went down to Orlando. So I was fortunate enough to explore all of these places. So apparently I was living the dream. And, you know, I think that is a huge part of it, because being a teacher, we have the flexibility to work anywhere there are students. And so to have the opportunity to combine my profession with a love of travel seemed perfect sense. So after a couple of years at North Carolina, I was beginning to burn out, which was unfortunately a testament to the American public education system. The 7:30 a.m. start times for the school day, they finished at 2:30, was beginning to get to me. I would have to have lunch and I would have to cover playground duty with my class as well. And then I would maybe have 40 minutes planning time a day if the students had a specialist subject, such as art or music. They would go to that teacher for them. And so I knew after 2 years that I was not the most effective teacher that I could be, because I was just so tired. I realized that burnout was real and I wasn't fair for the students and myself to continue there. So I knew that I wanted to continue to teach internationally. So I decided to log on to the Times Educational Supplement website and have a look through the international jobs there. And I really kind of didn't have a preference of where I wanted to go. I know I wanted to stay internationally, but I didn't know where I wanted to go. So it's resulted in sending application after application off to places as far away as Manila, Ho Chi Minh, Singapore, the whole host of things. So I sent them off. I eventually accepted a position at a small school in Schaffhausen, which is in the north of Switzerland, very close to the German border. This was a bit of a transition because I did a couple of years of German at school, but it did not stick with me at all. I admire anybody who can speak more than one language because I can speak one and sometimes not very well, depending on if I'm in the UK or in the US. The school itself was very much in keeping with the Swiss style chalet, a symmetrical brick building with wide windows and wooden stairs inside. It was the first school that I worked at that was an international baccalaureate, so IB primary years program, PYP. And so this was a shift as well because it wasn't something that I had the opportunity to explore before. There was courses or there was opportunity at York St John to look at theories of learning, and so the constructivist theory of learning was one of them, but I had never really, I recognized the importance of allowing students to ask their own questions and construct their own meaning, but it was never really the driving force in my lessons before. I was the one with the knowledge and I needed to pass it on to the to the students, excuse me, in order that they would learn, because that was what I understood was good teaching. And so this pushed me out of my comfort zone a lot. And really it allowed me as a teacher to respond to any questions with, I don't know, which is a scary place as a teacher to be, particularly with all this training. You know, you have the background, you have the knowledge, you should know the answers. And so, yeah, having a student ask me a question about, well, why is that like that? Or, you know, what is that for? Well, it's not in the curriculum that I've talked about, and it's not anything that I've learned about, so I truly don't know. And so my position changed at that school from one of a sage on the stage to more of a guide on the side, and recognizing the importance of including students in their learning journey, and the idea that the process is often way more important than the product. And so it was a very powerful experience for me. I had a very supportive partner teacher as well that I was able to collaborate with, and it was just a great opportunity that I learned a lot from. And while I was in Switzerland, obviously the center of Europe, being closer to the UK meant that I came home at least twice a year because it was closer. And that was nice to be closer to my friends. I was able to make phone calls. Time zones was less of a difference. I went from being 5 hours behind to 1 hour ahead. So it was easier to coordinate with friends. Obviously, this was before Facebook. And I was able to travel around Europe, visiting Stockholm, took a train ride down to Venice, across to Geneva, and I was fortunate enough to, yeah, to see more of Europe because it was just so much more convenient, and the public transport in Switzerland was second to none. So definitely taking advantage of that. After 2 years in Switzerland, I realized that it was time for a change again. So I began applying for jobs again, anywhere. I didn't know where. I just wanted something somewhere different to where I'd been before. So I sent off a whole barrage of applications again. And I finally accepted a position at an international school in Mexico City. So according to a recent, well, at the time, recent MSN article, I'd moved from the world's safest country to one of the most dangerous. So by this point, there was a lot of I'd moved around so much before it really didn't faze me. Though there was some hesitancy when I got there. I left Switzerland with 6 bags this time, so definitely accruing things along the way. Um, and my flight over there was memorable again. I remember when we got into Mexico, it was raining. There was a very sweet woman next to me who perhaps could sense my anxiety. I also should point out at this point, I spoke no Spanish. And I very naively felt that, oh, it's so close to the US. I imagine that some people do speak English there. So very, very naive of me. Anyway, getting back to the lady who was sat next to me, sensing my anxiety, she was chatting to me. She spoke English, and I probably had my first encounter with the Latin culture. She insisted that when I got settled into Mexico, I must come and visit her. And her son would show me around the city, and they would have tacos, and it would just, she felt that she needed to advocate or be an ambassador for her country. And that was my first experience of the just the warmth and the sheer enthusiasm and pride of Mexican people. So that was just amazing. And you know, I think that the opportunity to move to such a sprawling city as Mexico City could not be further removed from the small, sleepy Swiss town that I was living in. So I remember flying over Mexico City. We got the announcement that we were due to land, and it probably took about 10 minutes to fly over this huge metropolis, bigger than anything I'd ever seen before. Looking through the windows and seeing small buildings like shacks and then huge mansions all within miles of each other. It was just, it gave me pause to think about where I was coming to, but also full of excitement of possibilities by opening myself up to, you know, changes and trying something new. So when I got there, I went into my classroom and it was very much like any classroom I'd had before. I was extremely well resourced. We had green open spaces, playground, a soccer field, the whole shebang. I had a smart board in my classroom, and it was just an incredibly inviting place. So when I started there, I taught second grade, so year 3 again, kind of my sweet spot. And then I had the opportunity again to move down or move up to a grade level. So I decided, although my degree was in upper Key Stage 2, I decided to be a bit of a risk taker and try year 1, so first grade. And so I went down there and I taught for 2 years and I didn't look back. It was such a wonderful time with these young students. Again, this was an IB school, so they have lots of questions. And so it was a great opportunity to use their wonderings and their interests to fuel discussions and exploration of objects in the classroom. And so it was a great opportunity to do that. And I remember having such an international classroom. I had students in my room from Japan, from Mexico, from the USA, from the UK, from Brazil, from Colombia, so many places. And we were all able to come together and generally work together as a team. It was wonderful. The range of perspectives that were able to come together in order to move our learning forward and these understandings. And it was a great opportunity to work with so many cultures, and then the families that were so involved as well, who would often share their background or their culture as it connected to our learning in the classroom. So it was great. My time in Mexico as well, I tried to immerse myself in the culture by learning Spanish, not very well, and I was able to make a few Mexican friends. Unfortunately, well, the school itself was a very British expatriate school. So, But that wasn't the reason why I moved to Mexico. I moved to Mexico to be in Mexico, to meet Mexican people, to eat the food, to eat the street tacos, to experience the music and the culture. And so I tried to get out as much as I could to meet people, and the theme just fit with my first impression of it. Everyone was so warm, so welcoming, and it was just a great place to interact with other cultures, and they were thankfully very forgiving of my poor Spanish that I'd managed to learn after a few years there. And I must say, after 3 years, I got it up to a basic level. I could hold a conversation. So I suppose that's the power of immersion. So I spent 3 years in Mexico, and after that time, I decided I wanted to take on a leadership role. And so I began applying for PYP coordinator positions. And so the PYP coordinator position is a requirement of IB World schools. So in order to be a primary years program school, a PYP school, you have to have a PYP coordinator. And so usually these look different. It could be somebody who is a teacher, it could be somebody who is an administrator, but I realized that I wanted to seize this opportunity to grow professionally. So I was a little bit more discerning in my job application this time because I knew that was what I wanted. So I applied to a few schools as the PYP coordinator, and I eventually was offered a position at a Mandarin immersion school in Berkeley, California, which is just outside of San Francisco. So I was moving back to the US, to the West Coast this time, and I had the problem of trying to move my life from Mexico up to the West Coast. And so I also had a dog at this time, and so she was going to come with me. So I had a problem of how to get all of my things and my dog there. I explored the plane. This time it would have been at least 10 suitcases. You might notice a pattern. And so I decided to buy, in my infinite wisdom, to buy a cheap car, and we were going to drive it. What could possibly go wrong? So we drove the 2,400 miles from Mexico City to the Bay Area in California. We did it in 7 days with my dog Sierra as my co-pilot. And it took 7 days because we had to spend 3 days in El Paso, Texas, because the car needed some repair work. And I literally said to the garage, I said, just do whatever you need to do to get it the 1,500 miles more. Just slap a band-aid or plaster on it, whatever needs to be done, just do it. So thankfully, lots of praying, we managed to get there. And we started our new life, my dog and I, in California. So this was a learning curve, but the reason why it attracted me to this position was because I was also still teaching. So it was a part-time coordinator position, the curriculum coordinator, and then a part-time teacher as well. And so while I was at this school, I had the opportunity to teach students from year 1 right the way up to year 9. So completely the full range there. Again, a small school of about 100 students. And it was Mandarin immersion, and I didn't speak Mandarin, and to this day I can count to 3 and say hello. So yeah, that was different. But what I found in this position was that the opportunity and the importance of collaboration and bringing in those discussions around different perspectives and curriculum, and it was so important. After my first year there, I was offered the position of assistant head of school. I'd never been an assistant head of school or been in a leadership role before. And so but again, I would probably be very silly to turn it down. And so I accepted it. And now I had 3 jobs. I was teaching year 1 for a day, PYP coordinator, and being the assistant principal as well. So as I said, one of the pros of that position was the fact that I could do all the things. But what I found was that I was leaning into what I was comfortable with. So I was comfortable with teaching. I'd been doing it for years. And so I was focusing more on that and the curriculum aspect as well. Because I had been in Ivy World schools for this point for about 7 years, I knew the requirements, I knew the curriculum, I knew, what was required. So I found myself leaning into what I was comfortable with and kind of avoiding my administrative roles. And it was rough, it was difficult. Honest conversations with my principal, and it honestly took lots of risk taking on my part to be able to push myself further into something that I was beginning to be more comfortable with, which was in a leadership role, mentoring teachers, supporting them, having difficult conversations with parents if needed. That was on me now. And so I tried to push myself into it, and it was a process. I was at this school for 5 years, and so it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something that I tried to push myself into, and I got there. It was uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable, in all fairness, but it was something that I managed, and yeah, that I was proud of. So during my 5 years in California, I met my husband, and so it kind of looked like I was staying in the US a little bit more long term, which was fine. By this point, I had lived in two different states um, and thoroughly enjoyed seeing as much of the US as possible and places that I never thought I would be able to get to. I also took on the role while I was at this school of as part of the IB Educator Network, which allowed me the opportunity to visit IB schools throughout North America, and then also lead workshops for teachers who were either at the beginning process of learning about the PYP or they were further in their journey. And so that was a huge professional development opportunity. And I remember my first workshop in Los Angeles. I traveled down there and I was physically sick with nerves. I was just, I can't do this. Oh my gosh, I can't do this. They're not children. What do I do? It's fine, breathe. And so it was fine, and it was a great opportunity. And I worked with some amazing teachers from around the US then, and it was a great opportunity to put what I knew into practice and kind of consolidate my confidence that obviously I appeared to be lacking. So after 5 years at this school, my husband and I decided that it was time to try somewhere new. Um, this time, all of our belongings would not fit into two cars, so we needed a pod. Things were getting bigger. And so I started applying for jobs elsewhere around the US. And so I came across this position in Ohio, which I had not known much about Ohio before. I'd driven through it, but I'd never been there. They consider it the Midwest, even though it's East, which is an interesting perspective. And so we decided to move to Mansfield, Ohio, which is in the center of the state. And probably its only claim to fame is that the film The Shawshank Redemption was filmed here. So the reformatory and the opening scenes were all filmed in Mansfield, and people in Mansfield are very proud of that. And so it's a very great middle America type state. And we decided that we'd move across the country, another 2,500-mile journey in the books. And it was a lateral move for me. So, but this time I wasn't teaching. And I think I needed that staggered approach to leave the classroom, because really, when I went into teaching, I went into teaching to teach. And so to move out of the classroom, to become an administrator for me was not something I ever saw myself doing. And so that staggered approach really helped me. But I realized that I was just moving the relationships that I would have with the students in my class to the relationships with the students in the whole school, and getting to know them, their personalities, their struggles, their achievements. And so that different perspective really helped to move me along. And now, as an assistant head at my current school and the PYP coordinator, I try to spend as much time in classrooms as possible. I have some of my frequent flyers, my friends that spend some time and hang out with me because they need some time away from the classroom, and so I'm still able to build those relationships with the students. And so moving out of the classroom was definitely something that I appreciated, and I would do again, but it wasn't something that I ever saw myself doing. I saw myself teaching because that was what I did. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I am now. I'm still in Mansfield, Ohio. And I guess some advice to anybody who will be considering to move internationally is consider the pros and cons of moving. And I say that because when I moved, as I said before, I was living the dream. But when you have to start paying taxes and paying bills, and you have to be in bed early because you have to be up early, I think you need to make sure that you approach any decision with a balanced view. And it was often a trade-off. So there were some years, yes, I spent Christmas on a beach, or I visited Rio de Janeiro, but I also missed out on some important moments with my friends: christenings, weddings, birthday celebrations, because I just physically wasn't able to make it. And so that was tough. And now, because I've been out of the UK for so many years, I kind of feel in between cultures. I could go back to the UK, absolutely, but things have changed since I was there. And I'm not quite American, although I am a citizen now. So I'm one of those loud, brash Americans I first met on the plane a decade or so ago. And so don't go into it with rose-tinted glasses. It is something that takes thought. And you obviously, I had friends who moved in and out of the international scene. They moved back to the UK and they enjoyed their time and their experience abroad, and they brought that back with them to the UK. And so, that's important too. And so when considering positions overseas, it's always a good idea to look at the contract closely. Many schools in the Middle East and Asia will offer some kind of package, which may include a flight, accommodation, stipend, whereas schools in Europe tend not to do that. And negotiations around contracts at this time are often expected as well. So if something isn't what you expected, then it's definitely worth querying that and having a discussion if you're considering moving abroad. And then also, the power of relationships is just so important. My friends, I was I'm fortunate enough to keep in touch with not all of my friends, but some of them that I'd made through my time at York St. John. And we still have occasional Facebook chats, but their lives move on just as yours do. And so, I think it's important to recognize that things don't stay the same. You might be able to pick up where you left off, absolutely, but people's lives move on, even though, just as yours does. And so, but keeping those relationships and keeping them grounded is just so valuable, to share those, to have somebody who you can go to and just reminisce with old times, or who has known you for that length of time, is just so valuable. And then also relationships with new people as well. From working in different countries and different schools, I have friends all over the world, which is great for traveling, because we're like, hey, I'm in your country, can I stay with you? And so that's helpful as well. But also it just goes to show, the power of relationships. And I think that's one of the things that I got from York St. John. I remember in my first teaching practice, being bused up to schools in Middlesbrough, and obviously on a morning, everyone's bleary-eyed and just wants to get on the bus and just sleep until they get to school to catch up on that little bit of extra time. I get it. But on the way back from school, obviously, yes, you were tired, but there was also this opportunity discussions and collaborations and talks around, hey, so what are you doing in your class right now? How are you doing that? How did you even go about teaching that? And so that was a great opportunity to just really have chats about things. I still remember one of my classmates talking about one of the ways that they helped their students spell necessary, and it was one cap and two socks, which has stuck with me now years later, and it still helps me spell necessary. But I think those discussions with some peers and with colleagues is just, that's where the learning is, and that's kind of where, you know, the power happens. And I think also another kind of point that I hope we're able to glean from my monologue is the importance of never stop learning. Putting yourself in a position where you are extending yourself and you're able to grow. Because really, if you already know everything, then it's probably time to get out of teaching. There are new strategies, new resources, new materials, different ways of doing things. And so an open mind is key when considering these different perspectives and considering, you know, the different direction that things could go in and the learning. And for that, I have just enrolled, I'm in my, just completed my first year in my master's in educational leadership with the University of Cincinnati. So I'm almost 40 and I'm just starting my master's now. So it's an interesting perspective to come out as a mature student, but it's something that I'm really enjoying, and I'm really finding my passion for it. And so I encourage you definitely to keep learning. Another tip as well, culture shock is real, and so is reverse culture shock. So there are no magic bullets to get rid of that or to ease it. It's certainly difficult. Check-ins with family and friends can help, but they can also make things difficult because it's a reminder of where you're not. So I think the only thing that I found that worked for me was always having a handy bag of sweets or British treats nearby, whether that be a bag of crisps or Cadbury's chocolate. You got to do what you got to do. And so I highly recommend traveling with that. And oftentimes, you know, I was given the phrase when I moved to North Carolina, when people would ask me, and people would ask me, so what's different between the American teaching system and the British teaching system? And we were told to respond with, it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different, which is true. You know, it is not better, it's not worse, it's not different. And people don't want to hear, oh, well, in the UK, we do it like this. I mean, don't necessarily want to hear that. You know, they want to hear those, it doesn't lend itself to an in-depth, enriching, growth-evoking discussion. And so, well, it's not better, it's not worse, but we do things, we may perhaps do this approach, and then here we do this approach. It's not putting value on one over the other, but it's considering that maybe an amalgamation of them might be the way forward. And so it would always grate on me when I would work with people and say, well, in my school, we did it like this, and that was much better. I wasn't very open-minded of them. So there were many international schools around the world, British international schools, immersion schools. And so I encourage you, if you are considering a position in an international school, to research it. Go onto Facebook. It's interesting because the international teaching scene is kind of small. By the time I moved to my school in Mexico, I was already working with somebody who had previously worked in North Carolina the year before I got there. And I worked with somebody who had worked with somebody I worked with in North Carolina in Vietnam. So there are all these connections. And so there are people that you can reach out to through Facebook. There's a website called International Schools Review that you can use to check out schools. Again, I always take them with a pinch of salt because sometimes they're with embittered employees, but sometimes there are interesting things because not like all schools in the UK aren't equal, all schools around the world are not equal. So I encourage you to do your research. And then I suppose the final thing is to be open to new possibilities. Consider the places that you go. I never thought in 2004, when I graduated from York St. John, that, what is it, 18 years later, that I would be living in Mansfield, Ohio, in the USA. No, never crossed, never, nothing was further from my mind. And so being open to new possibilities allows you to experience new things, which just broadens horizons, and it helps me become a better educator, and it also helps me become a better person by considering these different perspectives and issues, and um, being an inquirer myself, which is the philosophy of the IB International Baccalaureate Program, an approach for lifelong learning with an international lens. So, yeah, so that's kind of my story, and I appreciate you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I hope you can hear me. I keep flickering in and out there with the speakers, but that was really insightful. Thank you so much for your time there. So if you've got a few more minutes, I will. I've got a few questions I'd like to throw at you. You did touch upon some of them, but obviously you've kind of travelled across the world and you've applied for lots of different teaching positions.
Mm.
If I was a student now, could you give me any tips or advice on what I should be doing when I'm completing those application forms? Is there any good tips or things I should really concentrate on when I'm looking at applying across these different countries to try and get a teaching position?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, one of the first things I would definitely recommend would be checking the school's website. So the first thing you do when you find a position that you're interested in would be to go to their website and see if it fits with your personal philosophy and your personal beliefs. And seeing and learning more about the location that it is in, and doing as much research as possible and asking around. Oftentimes, the application process can move slowly and then it moves quickly. I remember when I interviewed in Mexico, I put my application in. I think in probably around January. I didn't hear anything for about a month, and then I got offered an interview. And so I attended the interview, and the same day I had a job offer. So it can move slowly and then it can move quick. But in that time that it's moving slowly, it really gives me an opportunity. It really gave me an opportunity to kind of research into Mexico and find out more about it. Thankfully, social media has made the world smaller. And so I remember asking friends of friends who had been to Mexico and getting their perspective on things as well. But then also recognize that the biases that people might come with. And so, oh no, Mexico, no, you don't want to go there. And kind of considering that and keeping an open mind as well. But yeah, definitely checking the school, doing your research, and also realize that you're making a huge decision by deciding to move somewhere. And so it's okay to ask the school what they will do to support you,
Yeah.
a new teacher, or a new employee into this school. What will you do to help me? There was a story, unfortunately, of a teacher again in Mexico, a couple of years before I arrived there, who had arrived to teach, and it was clear that they were struggling. And one day they just didn't show up for work, and they later found out that she was back on a flight back to the UK, and couldn't hack it. And I think that's you need to make sure that that doesn't happen to you,
Yeah.
and the way you can do that is by researching into it, and just doing your homework with it as well, and then think about it. Most teaching contracts are for 2 years, which is why I kind of stayed where I was, and then after that it's renewable every year.
Okay.
So think about it, could I live here for 2 years? Could I, call it a home? Think about the language. It wasn't a barrier for me, thankfully, in many places, even though I didn't speak the language, but it certainly would have made things easier if I had spoken German or
Yeah.
Spanish. So yeah, so definitely lots of research, lots of homework, and then, reflecting on, is this a life choice that I want to make for a couple of years.
So out of all of your travels that you did, obviously UK, Swiss, across the US, I'm not going to ask you which was your favorite teaching system, because I think that's unfair. I think by the sound of it, they're all so different. But where in the world did you love teaching in? What was the one place that you kind of fell in love with, if you did, obviously?
Yeah, gosh, that's a tough question. I definitely would say one that will have a special place in my heart would probably, and it's North Yorkshire in Ampleford, because that was my first class. It was my first full-time teaching position. It enabled me to get to grips with the national curriculum, all the strategies that we had to do. And then it also really honed my skills with regards to differentiation of abilities in students. And so I wasn't so much of a fan of the commute. I think it was like 45 minutes from where I lived in York to
Yeah.
Ampleforth across winding country roads. But yeah, it was my first teaching position, and I definitely grew a lot as a teacher.
Oh, that's good. So there's a couple more questions.
Yeah.
So whilst you were at York St John, was there a particular module or course that you did that you would absolutely say is necessary for all students to commit to, or make sure they study the hardest within that, that you got a lot from?
Yeah, and I would have to say, as an educator, or as one of the teaching students, it would be my final teaching practice, without doubt. Like, this was what I appreciated about York St John was this scaffolded way that their approach to teaching practices. So we spent time in schools observing good practice, and getting to know the students, and then working with the teachers to plan lessons. And then gradually over the course of that, we would then take on the role as a teacher. And so I would definitely say my final teaching practice, it was also the most exhaustive, or exhausting, but it was without a doubt the most useful one. A whole host of paperwork, planning to the nth degree, but it was a lot of useful practice that I was able to carry forward with me, even to this day. I think I still have my binder of lesson plans. It's traveled with me from country to country. Lesson documents that I might use, or reading group plans that I might pull from.
Yeah.
So that was definitely the most useful, as I took on the role of the teacher, writing reports and planning, and thinking about school trips and events, and getting to know the class for the last, I think it was about a month or 2 months that our final practice was. So for that extended time, and building those relationships, and thankfully I was fortunate enough to be with a teacher who was very hands-off, and wasn't a micromanager, because that never goes well.
No.
So she went, "Oh, it's your class, I will support you in however I can." And that meant a lot, that she had this confidence in me to be able to do that. So yeah, without a doubt, definitely the final teaching practice.
Fantastic. So I've got one very work-related question. So currently, the position you're in, and even I suppose over the last couple of years, is there a secret software or piece of tool that you can share with our students or alumni that they could tap into, or something they may not have heard of before, that they could really, gain knowledge from, or help them in their journey moving forward?
Yeah, so the immediate one that came to mind when you said that was probably the not so secret one, which was the Google Suites. Because, like, I use it for in my position, I use it to make Google sites to house staff meeting agendas. I use it to create Google surveys for teachers to get their input on things as well. And so just the diverse range of software that they have available through all of those is definitely useful. But I would also like to recommend as well Canvas, which is a great website. It's free, and it has a whole host of templates that are ready-made there. So I've used that as a great resource in my own personal education through the University of Cincinnati to create posters, and they'll say, okay, you have to keep a portfolio of work. And so who wants a boring portfolio in well, so it has a whole host of templates that I've been pulling from, and it's slightly more exciting
Yeah,
than a Word document. So yeah, I would recommend Canvas as well.
fantastic. So to finish off today's talk, a very alumni question. So when you were here at York St John, what was your best memory? And it doesn't have to be, you know, that you were in your class enjoying yourself, obviously being very studious, but what was your best memory of being here at York St John?
Probably would be our final prom. It was bittersweet.
Oh,
And so, yeah, that one. I was also the LGBTQ officer for the Students' Union at the
mm.
time. And so I got to rub shoulders with the main event of that prom, which was Lisa from Steps. And so,
Wow.
I mean, that was phenomenal. And just because you get a sense at that point as well that things are starting to wrap up, people are looking ahead to their journeys. And so it was very bittersweet,
Mm.
but
Oh.
wonderful memory nevertheless.
But exciting times for everybody. That's oh well. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Simon, for your time today. It was really, really interesting to listen to your journey, and thank you for giving us a piece of advice and tips for our students and alumni community. So, thank you so much, and I wish you well in everything you do in the future, and keep in touch.
Thank you, Louise.
Okay, take care.